Welcome. Today we have a very special guest, Samantha Perkins. She's going to talk to us a little bit about her journey to becoming alcohol-free. Samantha is a best-selling author of the book Alive AF, One Anxious Mom's Journey to Becoming Alcohol-Free. She also has a blog called Alive AF and has even spoken on a TED Talk, TEDx, as a TEDx speaker. She's been featured in today's Women's Magazine and made an appearance on Wave 3 News. She graduated from the University of Kentucky with a BA in psychology and spent 10 years working in community mental health, where she gained knowledge and skills in understanding the importance of caring for our mental health. She uses her background to write and speak about the connection between alcohol, stress, anxiety, depression, and mood. So welcome, Samantha.
Hey, hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm super excited to have you here today. So I'd like to kind of maybe start by explaining a little bit of your background and how you decided maybe to write your book and start your blog in the first place.
Sure. So I have had anxiety since my childhood. I can remember having my first panic attack when I was a teenager, a freshman in high school. But at the time, it was the early 90s, and people weren't talking much about anxiety, and mental health kind of wasn't a thing, especially in the small town where I grew up. And so I kind of went undiagnosed for many years. But the older I got, the more knowledge I gained and realized that, it was anxiety that I was experiencing. And I started kind of on a quest to try to manage it. Because if you have anxiety or depression or any kind of mood stuff, you understand that it can be quite debilitating and can take over your life and can make things more difficult than they have to be. So, I was spending years and years reading self-help books and making sure I was doing all the right types of diets, and I went on a very strict sleep regimen and exercise and yoga and meditation and mindfulness and just one coping skill after the other. And I found that I wasn't really making all that progress. And I realized that even though I was reading self-help books and meditating and journaling and doing yoga and going on runs, I was still spending most evenings waiting for happy hour and then opening up a bottle of wine or cracking open a couple of beers and drinking every day. And when I would drink, I immediately felt relief. It took the edge off. I would feel relaxed for a little while. And at the time, I just didn't realize the correlation between drinking and mental health, or drinking and anxiety. And so I was kind of undoing all of my, all this hard work I was doing. Every time I would drink, I was undoing it, and didn't even realize, how much I was sabotaging everything. And when I discovered this, I stopped drinking and started telling other people, because I thought I can't be the only one who, doesn't realize that alcohol is affecting my mental health or, sabotaging my efforts. And I didn't really have this story of a rock bottom or like something bad that happened. And I think culturally we kind of think that you can drink until something bad happens, and then, oh no, you're an alcoholic and you're going to need to get help. And that's really not always the case. I think that alcohol has a huge impact on our mood and our stress and our overall well-being, and we just don't talk about that enough. So that's what kind of led me to talking about the blog and then writing the book and just speaking about it as much as I can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think in your book you mentioned you kind of grew up thinking, and I think most of us think this way, there's kind of like three categories of people who drink. And you talked about, people who just don't drink for religious reasons, or maybe because they had been an alcoholic or something like that. And then people who drink socially, and then alcoholics, right? So there seems like there's this fine line between socially drinking and alcoholism. And we tend to think that, you have to hit rock bottom and, be, maybe homeless, drinking out of a paper bag, I think was the description you gave. But that's not the case, right? There's a lot of steps where alcohol can be an issue before someone hits rock bottom.
Yeah. And I think I was kind of sucked into, you see in the movies and in commercials, drinking looks pretty glamorous until it's not. But you
Mhm.
don't really, we don't portray people, having hangovers and how, crappy it is to wake up on a Saturday and have to take care of your kids after you had too much to drink the night before, and I think it's just the simple things where I think media and culture kind of shaped my ideas, and so I never even considered alcohol being a component to my, unmanageable anxiety.
Right. And I think I remember you in the book mentioning also that um, you kind of thought alcohol was good for you because you had heard, like, 1 or 2 drinks a day of red wine is heart healthy. And, that information gets spread very quickly about how if something that we like might be good for us, right, then a lot of times that is what we cling to, and maybe it then becomes harder to recognize when it might be becoming an issue.
Absolutely. And I think this is where, I would love seeing articles like that because it kind of validated, because there were times I was like, I'm drinking pretty much every night. This started happening for me like, I went from like, college drinking to like what I would call adult drinking, where, I have 2 small kids at home and we weren't going out as much anymore. And so we did just start kind of like drinking at home. And, it was nothing to just open up a bottle of wine every night, and I didn't drink the whole bottle every night, but sometimes I had more than I needed to, and sometimes I just had 1 glass. But yeah, if I saw an article like that, I was gung ho sharing it with everybody because I wanted to validate my drinking. I even remember I had some pretty awful postpartum depression. And there was a lot of information about how drinking beer, oatmeal stouts specifically, would like help increase your breast milk production. And so, I was like drinking oatmeal stouts, thinking this was going to be great. Meanwhile, suffering from just this horrible postpartum depression and not having any idea between the two.
And two, I think you mentioned how the medical community kind of failed you at that point. You were searching, Googling for anything to show, like, is this drinking too much drinking, right? And I think sometimes in the medical community, we look at what's called a CAGE question. It stands for cut back, angry, guilty, eye opener. CAGE is an acronym. So it's like more extreme, right? So do you feel like you need to cut back? Are other people angry about your drinking? Do you feel guilty about your drinking? Do you feel like you need an eye opener? Like those are kind of some of the screening questionnaires that are sometimes used, which isn't a great, I mean, there are much better screening questionnaires for like risky alcohol use or alcohol use disorder that aren't, necessarily alcoholism. And I think that you make a good point that I think in healthcare, this is often ignored and can easily be missed. I mean, there are things that and missed for multiple reasons, right? Missed because there's a lot going on in one visit, and is that the thing that is highlighted? And missed also because of cultural norms. And I think that's something else you brought up in your book, like the town that you grew up in. It was very normal to drink a lot. It's very similar in the town that I grew up in. And so it's hard to see outside of what has always been normal. And so it might not even be something that you necessarily bring up in a visit or that comes up in the visit unless it's become a drastic scenario, right?
Yes, yes, so good. It's multi-layered because I didn't want to bring it up. In some ways, I would go to my doctor visits in a hope that they would ask me more questions about it so that I could then be honest about it. But I wasn't going to say, because of shame and embarrassment, I wasn't going to say, I do drink every night. Do you think that's having an impact on my health? Just because I felt embarrassed. And maybe I also figured everybody does it, like I couldn't really see the difference between my drinking and everybody else's unless something really bad had happened, like you said. And then also, as a very anxious person, I'm a type A perfectionist, personality. So those kinds of questionnaires, the answer was always no. I never had a problem with it. It never impacted, my ability to like wake up and go for a run and get things done, even if I felt like crap. I mean, I was baking the cupcakes for the PTA. I was showing up. I was, my house was clean. I never missed a doctor's appointment. So, you think about the criteria of what people might who be struggling with alcohol maybe aren't meeting that. But, I think that there are a lot of women specifically who are struggling with alcohol, but also, crushing it in all the things that they're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you also mentioned the amount of time that you spent. I mean, I think that was maybe one key kind of epiphany for you, was that you were spending a lot of time thinking about doing or recovering from alcohol. And honestly, I think probably all of us have something in our life that we spend too much time thinking about doing or recovering from, right? And you recognize that for you, this was alcohol, and it seemed to also make your anxiety worse, right? Like there were consequences to it for you.
Absolutely. And I tell people even today, I've been, alcohol free for over 4 years, and it's still my favorite thing to not have to think about the alcohol. It was so consuming because I would, drink a little bit, maybe have 2 or 3 glasses of wine, and then I would wake up in the middle of the night. I wouldn't feel so good. And so then I'm starting to make these promises to myself. Tomorrow I'm not going to drink. I'm going to, take a couple days off, or I'm going to try to, go this weekend without drinking. And then I would get to like the happy hour and everybody else was drinking. And then I'm like debating, should I have another one? Is this enough? Am I having a good enough time? It just really robbed me from ever being able to be present. And I tell people to replace the word alcohol with whatever their thing is, because the freedom that I have for that was just, it still is my most favorite thing, just not having to think about it. And then, I have so much more space, brain power and space now. So I can use that energy to utilize coping skills for anxiety instead of all this, mess going on in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what would you tell someone, who may be in this contemplative stage, right? They're starting to think about, maybe something in my life is a little bit too time consuming. And I think you talked about maybe in your blog about the pros and cons of evaluating this, right? The pros and cons of thinking about, could I be drinking too much alcohol? So how would you kind of instruct someone who's thinking, you know what, maybe this is an issue for me, but it's definitely not that big of an issue, but it might be something worth considering?
Yeah, I have a lot of answers for that, because I think culturally, the question we all ask ourselves is, do I have a problem with this? And, I asked myself that question over and over again, and the answer was really no. I didn't meet the criteria for alcoholism. I, never got a DUI. I was never late for work. No one in my life would have really said that I had problems with alcoholism, with alcohol. And so when I asked the question, do I have a problem with this? The answer was no. When I should have been asking myself, could my life be better without this? And, the answer was definitely yes, most certainly. Not only will your anxiety go down, but you'll sleep better and you'll have more free time and space, and you won't have a hangover anymore. And, just all of these other great things that came from it. So the first thing is, just helping people to kind of rephrase, like, is this thing impacting living your best life? And
so I think that from the outside, the amount of drinking you were doing, I think probably none of your friends were concerned about it. None of your family was concerned about it. It was probably very culturally normal. So at what point did you decide to maybe think that it could be causing an issue? And what advice would you give to people who are maybe in that contemplative state, and maybe think that their level of drinking may be interfering with their lives?
Yeah, well, I had the luxury of stumbling across a blog where a person was talking about alcohol, much like I do now, aside from addiction. And particularly, I ran across some stuff about mental health and the correlation. And so that kind of led me down a rabbit hole of reading some books and just learning about alcohol, what it is in general. It never crossed my mind to question what the substance is that I'm using, and could it be harmful? So the first thing for me was just really education, because, you know, alcohol is a drug. It does kill, it's responsible for 95,000 deaths per year. It's the third leading cause of preventable death. And it's more than cocaine and heroin and opioids. And we know that cocaine, heroin, and opioids are like a crisis. We talk about it all the time, but alcohol is never even mentioned. And so I think that learning about, you know, I hate to sound kind of dramatic when I say this, but my quote unquote drug of choice was really important, because I learned how it affects mental health, what it does to my body, how it affects my liver. So education was a really huge piece for me. And then the second part is, you know, I think because alcohol is so accepted and normal in our culture and among our friends and our family, we are scared to ask, is my alcohol use affecting, or is my alcohol use problematic? Because then we think we might have to quit. And that would just be, you know, we're terrified that we might have to quit doing this thing that we love to do. And so I think the question that we normally say, is alcohol problematic? And we should be asking ourselves, could my life be better without alcohol? Or could my life be better without, you know, insert whatever thing that you're doing that's problematic for you. And when you start doing that, it kind of changes the narrative a little bit and helps you understand. I use this analogy kind of when I'm talking about this. You know, if I told my friends and family and you that I went out to this, you know, restaurant, I went out to this Mexican restaurant and I ate this food, and after I ate it at night, it gave me a stomach ache, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and sometimes I throw up, and the whole next day I have a headache, everyone would be like, don't ever eat there again. You know, but with alcohol, we all just accept this as normal. And so I think part of it is just like continuing to drink the way that you normally would, but having some thoughts around it, getting mindful about it, and saying to yourself, you know, do I like feeling like this? You know, because what happens is it does help us relax. It really does. And I have yet to be able to find another thing that will work within 30 seconds the way that alcohol did, you know, that first feeling after you take those first few sips. But after that, the cons scientifically really outweigh the pros. And so I ask people and encourage people to start looking at those and to feel like it's okay. You know, when people tell us we do it with everything else in our culture. If they're vegan, or if somebody stops, wants to go vegetarian, every restaurant that I go to has gluten-free options. You know, why are we not throwing alcohol into the mix of things that we want to assess and, you know, discover how they're impacting our health?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you made a great point, just becoming mindful of it and really paying attention, because I think that is the biggest issue with a lot of things, right? Is just our ability to put our attention on it and see how it's affecting our body. Do your own experiment on your own body, because everyone does metabolize alcohol differently, and everyone does experience it differently. And I think people that overuse it definitely probably get more benefit out of it than people who don't, right? There's some payback, some sort of feedback or benefit from using alcohol that keeps them wanting to do it. Whereas for some people, there's not as big of a reward. And so there's less of a desire to, you know, use something like that.
Correct.
So, yeah, I think what you mentioned, just being mindful and at first and recognizing how it might affect you individually is the first step. And then you actually don't drink at all now, correct?
Yeah, not at all. And I don't miss it one bit. You couldn't pay me to drink.
That's great. So can you maybe talk about that, the day, I mean, I read about it in your book, but talk about the day you decided not to drink, and then how that led to however long it's been.
Yeah, so you know, I want people to know, because when people hear this story, they think like, oh, you know, I'm not going to stop drinking because she and we didn't drink alike. She doesn't like drinking as much as I did. And I mean, I loved drinking. It was my best friend. You know, I think I wrote about it in the book or in the blog. You know, drinking was there for me in good times and in bad. You know, it was right there for, you know, celebrations, but also for sad times and stressful times, and anything that was worth living about, you know, I would have a drink for that. And so I did really, really, really love it. And so when I stopped, you know, the first part was mourning. You know, I equate it to, you know, breaking up or a divorce, you know, like, because it was really hard to not have this thing that I depended on to be there for me, you know, both the chemicals from alcohol definitely helped my anxiety and helped me calm down. But then also just holding a glass in my hand was like this social, it helped me, I guess, with my social anxiety and social settings. I always just had this drink that I would carry around and it would help me calm down. And it was kind of like a buffer between me and whoever I was talking to. But the more, after I mourned and got the alcohol out of my system, I just first and foremost, because I started sleeping, my anxiety started getting better almost instantly. So all those things that I had done prior to work on were now finally working. The self-help books and the meditation and the mindfulness. These things were working when I wasn't using alcohol every day, and so my anxiety started getting better. And now I just can't imagine putting myself in a position where I would drink something that would ignite that back up. I just never want to feel that way again. And furthermore, I just never having a headache, a hangover headache. I mean, I have had plenty of headaches, but just never being hungover. Life is so hard, especially these last few years with COVID and, just parenting and stress and all the things. I just can't imagine having a hangover on top of all of that. And so it's not desirable to me whatsoever. And it didn't happen overnight. It's definitely taken time. But it's just not something that I ever wish to do again.
And I think sometimes it's hard for people to see how things would be different, right? So, what is now feels normal. And so it might be hard to recognize, like, it's not normal to, wake up feeling hungover, or it's not normal to feel more tired, or, those things aren't normal until you're outside of that and you're
Right.
now living this cleaner life, and, you're reaping the benefits of it. You feel healthier and happier, than you had previously, where you might not have recognized when you were in it that it was as bad as it was, but looking back, you recognize it.
You're absolutely right. I had just accepted that as normal. I accepted that I was always just a little bit under the weather and a little bit edgy and a little bit foggy and too tired. I thought that was normal. And now looking back, like you said, I know that it wasn't normal, and I don't want to feel like that anymore.
And you mentioned even in your book, like, you would take like sparkling water, and like when you would go places, just to have something to hold in your hand. We were talking about similar things, like when smokers quit, they want something to hold in their hand, right?
Yeah.
So there's a pattern to it, right? There's a habit.
Absolutely. And I didn't realize how physical that was for me. And just in general, now it doesn't bother me at all, but I do know for a long time, I had a purse full of something to drink that I could have. And, luckily now, if you search for it, you'll find that there's a huge alcohol-free community, and there are so many options that have like all of these health benefits for drinking. They have all these non-alcoholic beers and wines and some stuff that's really delicious and can feel festive and fun. And, there's mocktail recipes and all these fun things. So, a lot of times now, unless someone knows me as, Samantha from Alive AF, which most people don't. So if I go into a social setting with my non-alcoholic drink, no one even knows that I'm not drinking,
Yeah. So that's all super important information. Is there anything else that you want the listeners to know? I know you're on a mission to help educate people that being alcohol-free is good for your health and fun and should be culturally normal. So what other advice do you have for listeners?
I just tell people to really, if you're listening to this, hopefully from today forward, you're going to start noticing, how much alcohol is glamorized in our culture, on TV shows and on memes that you see across your social media feed. In every conversation, even today, that I have, someone is always talking about like drinking to take the edge off or drinking for stress. And I think once you start noticing that, how saturated we are with this alcohol talk, I think it's once you become aware of it, then you can start to really explore and educate yourself. And, even my mom, for example, she's like, no, I never even noticed how many commercials come on about alcohol until you mentioned it to me, and so I think just noticing, and then just to tell people that, it's not as glamorous as the media and shows and movies make it seem, and that life without alcohol is really, really great. And that the things and misconceptions that we believe, that you'll have to be destined to a basement of, church basement of recovery meetings for the rest of your life doesn't necessarily have to be true unless you want it to be. And in that case, good for you, but that you can stop drinking and live a very full and exciting and happy life.
And you mentioned that you feel like you have a lot of free time for so many new things now that you don't have as much time consumed by, planning the evening with alcohol, or spending the evening with alcohol, or recovering from the evening with alcohol. What are some examples of things that you get to spend your time on now that you enjoy, that maybe you didn't have as much time for before?
Yeah. I always say that the thing I did when I was drinking was drink. That was like the activity. I got to whatever that happy hour of the day, and then I'm going to drink for my fun. And, that was my hobby. But now I have all these other hobbies. Writing is one of them. There would be no book without, not drinking. But also I joined a writing club, and now I have friends all over the country who are like very close to me that I would have never met had it not been for that. I taught myself to play the ukulele. I learned how to mountain bike ride, and just, I've made so many more friends from like the alcohol-free and sober community. So like, I was so worried that I'd never have any friends again, The other thing was, the other night I went to a concert, and I used to think that like concerts would be over if I stopped drinking, but like I went and saw a band that I love to listen to, and I wasn't standing in line in the back, going to the bathroom, or standing in line for drinks the whole time. So even things like that are way more fun to me, that I can like be present for and enjoy. So the time that I spent drinking was really taking up any time for hobbies or play. And now I feel like I can have a lot more time for like playing and just, engaging in things that are fun. I try new things because I don't have that anxiety, the hangover on top of the anxiety that prevents me from wanting to do things. So all kinds of good stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I know you've mentioned that you were able to see the long-term benefits, right? You mentioned how, the alcohol calmed you down immediately, but then the long-term benefit, it just made you more anxious. So and now you have all of this energy to do all of these new and exciting things. So that's wonderful.
Yeah. It really, like, when I know I sound like super cheesy because I'm so excited about it, but it just took up way too much of my time for too long. And, getting to the other side wasn't easy. There were for sure some rocky and hard spots, but it's been over 4 years now. And I barely even think about it. I go into a restaurant, don't even bother looking at the list of, wines and beers anymore. I don't really, other than when I'm talking about it for this platform purpose, I'm not thinking about alcohol anymore. It's just no longer a part of my life, much like I don't think about my ex-boyfriends or, the other things that I've left behind.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know that this will be super beneficial to a lot of people. And sometimes it's just nice to know there's somebody else out there who went through something similar. And I'm going to put a link to a lot of the resources to your book, and then to a couple books that you recommended as well. And also to the screening questionnaires for alcohol use disorder, for anybody who feels like this is a direction they might want to put some of their own attention into.
Yeah, that's great.
So thank you very much, Samantha.
Thank you.